Today, we're digging into a really fascinating economic puzzle from history. It's a story about what should have been a massive agricultural boom, but it just never happened. Okay, so let's set the scene. You've got British rule in South Asia connecting the region to this huge global market. All of a sudden, there's massive demand for crops. We're talking jute, tea, indigo, the works. You have all the ingredients for an agricultural explosion. And yet, productivity just kind of stalls. Why? What went wrong? That is the central question we're tackling today. We're going to play detective, look at the evidence, line up the suspects, and really try to figure out the hidden forces that stopped a potential farming revolution dead in its tracks. So, our investigation kicks off with our first group of suspects, the Jotadars. For a long time, a popular theory put them right at the center of this whole mystery, especially when it came to the booming jute trade. So, who exactly were these Jotadars? Well, think of them as the big fish in a small pond. They weren't necessarily the richest landlords in the whole country, but at the village level, they were the ones calling the shots. They owned a decent chunk of land, sure, but they were also the local moneylender and the guy who bought and sold crops. They were the middlemen, the power brokers. Now, the theory about them seemed pretty simple, almost too simple. It went like this. British companies wanted jute for their factories back home, so they went through the local Jotadars, who had the peasant farmers under their thumb. The Jotadars supposedly just squeezed every last drop of profit out of the peasants, and none of that money ever got put back into improving the farms. Seems like an open and shut case of exploitation, right? Well, here's where the case starts to fall apart. When historians actually crunch the numbers, this neat little theory didn't quite hold up. And this quote really gets to the heart of it. Turns out the entire export sector, all that jute and all those other cash crops, was just a tiny sliver of the overall farming economy. It just wasn't big enough to be the single cause for stagnation everywhere. So, here's the twist. The Jotadar theory is just incomplete. Not only was the export market smaller than everyone thought, but we also have evidence that lots of small peasant farmers were making their own calls. They saw the high prices for jute and decided for themselves to plant a little bit of it. They were responding to the market directly. No Jotadar needed to force them. So the Jotadars weren't these all-powerful puppet masters. Our mystery, it seems, goes a lot deeper. All right, so if the Jotadars aren't our main culprits, the investigation has to turn to the next group of suspects, the really big traditional landlords, the zamindars. Why weren't they pouring money into making their huge estates more productive? And first, let's be really clear about who we're talking about here. A zamindar was a totally different animal from a Jotadar. These were often old money, hereditary landlords. They held rights over massive territories, sometimes covering dozens of villages. They were basically professional rent collectors. And a lot of the time, they lived miles and miles away from the land they actually owned. You'd think these guys, with all the land and power, would be the ones building big irrigation projects to boost their own incomes, but they had their own set of massive problems. I mean, look at this list. Their properties were often a complete mess. A field here, a field there, scattered all over the place. That makes it pretty hard to build one big canal. They also didn't have much direct control on the ground, and over time, they got stuck in these constant, bitter fights with peasants over rent. Any chance of working together just went out the window. This comparison just says it all. You look at England during its own agricultural revolution, and the landlords there had these neat, consolidated blocks of land. If they dug a ditch, they got all the benefit. But in Bengal, a zamindar's land was a patchwork quilt. Investing in one patch was a huge gamble because the rewards were so tough to control or even predict. The very way the land was owned was a massive roadblock to progress. Okay, so it's not the Jotadars and it's not the zamindars. The answer to our mystery doesn't seem to be a single group of people. It's looking more and more like the culprit is the system itself, the system that connected everybody. And that brings us to the most common way of farming the land, sharecropping. In Bengal, they called it the Barga system. The idea is really simple. A farmer, the Bargadar, doesn't own the land they work. They farm a plot for a landowner, like a Jotadar, and instead of cash rent, they pay the owner a fixed share of whatever they grow. This was everywhere. Now, there was a really common stereotype, both then and now, that the problem was just the sharecroppers themselves. You know the argument. Because they didn't own the land and could be kicked off at any time, they must have been lazy and had no reason to improve things. But is that actually what was happening? Well, the history says not really. In practice, landowners almost never kicked out their sharecroppers. It was just too much hassle to find someone new. So that insecurity thing, it wasn't the main problem.
The real culprit, the smoking gun in our whole investigation, was hidden in the fine print of the deal itself. So let's zoom in on the mechanics of this system, because this is where we find what you could call a built-in depressor, the one feature that quietly killed any motivation for growth year after year after year. Believe it or not, this entire massive historical puzzle, it really boils down to this one number, 50%. This was the magic number that ran the whole show. And here is the absolute killer detail. The sharecropper had to give the landowner half of the gross harvest, not half the profit, half of everything they grew. So put yourself in their shoes. You decide to spend your own money on better fertilizer to grow more rice. You pay for 100% of that cost, you take 100% of the risk, and if it works, if you manage to grow 10 extra bags of rice, you have to immediately turn around and hand 5 of them over to the landlord. You only get to keep half the reward for your own work and investment.
This quote from the economist Gunnar Myrdal just nails it. The sharecropper wasn't being lazy, they were being completely rational. Why on earth would you bust your hump and spend your own money to improve one plot of land when you automatically lose half the gains? It made way more sense to just go rent another piece of land or find some other work. The system itself created a powerful reason not to invest.
So let's put all these pieces together and solve this thing. The solution to our mystery isn't a person, it's a trap, a systemic trap that locked absolutely everyone into a cycle of low productivity. And that's our final verdict. There was no single bad guy holding everything back. What you had instead was this perfectly, almost beautifully constructed economic trap, where every single person, just by acting in their own best interest, made the whole system stagnate. Let's just break it down one last time, because it's so clear when you see it all together. The sharecroppers on the bottom, they had zero incentive to invest because they lose half the reward. The Jotadars in the middle, they were getting a sweet, risk-free 50% of the harvest for doing nothing, so they had no need to invest. And the big Zamindars at the top, with their scattered lands, they had no ability to make any big investments pay off. See? Everyone was completely and totally stuck. And that leaves us with a really big question, one that goes way beyond colonial India. It makes you ask, how often, even right now, are the biggest problems we face caused not by bad people, but by bad systems? Systems that create traps where no one is really to blame, but everyone is stuck. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, to really solve a problem, you have to change the rules of the game itself.